welcome back to the Plenary 2 of the Annual World Congress of the IMCR. And our topic for the discussion is the future of Internet governance and the roadmap of the United Nations for digital cooperation. You know, between Internet governance and the IMCR, there is a long history. We discussed IMCR in IMCR Internet governance issues already in the 1990s, before ICANN was established. And at this time, Internet governance was seen more as a technical issue with some political implications. But in the 30 years since that, the world has changed. And today, Internet governance is a political issue, it's a technical component. And there is nothing anymore in world politics which is not affected by the Internet. Even national security is today cybersecurity, national economy is the digital economy, and trade is digital trade. And human rights are relevant offline and online, and in particular freedom of expression and privacy are key issues in the online discussion if it comes to Internet governance. Insofar, there are no two worlds anymore, and the debate on Internet governance have moved out of the garage of the geeks and freaks and is now in the offices of prime ministers and presidents and ministers. So, and this is a challenge for an academic organization like the IMCR. And so I'm very happy that we have an excellent panel here, which gives us different perspectives from different parts of the world. So we have 3 ladies and 1 man. And I welcome Laura DiNartis from the American University in Washington, D.C. from the US. I welcome Anita from the IT for Change from India. I welcome Helen from the Sheffield University from the UK, which is in a broader sense still Europe, even if UK is not anymore a member of the European Union. And I welcome the only male speaker, Xiangdong Li from China. He's now with the university and he was the CEO for the CCTLD, for CINIC, the CCTLD for China for many, many years. So just a couple of days ago, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, presented his roadmap on digital cooperation. And this roadmap reflects all the changes which have taken place in this Internet governance ecosystem in the last 10, 15 years since the UN World Summit on the Information Society, which took place in the early 2000 years and adopted the Tunis Agenda in 2005. And this roadmap, you know, have raised a number of issues and gives us an orientation for the 10 years ahead of us until the year 2030. And I think it's a great opportunity for the IMCR and for experts to reflect about this document. And so I'm very happy that we have this opportunity here now to get different perspectives. So while it's the document will not, or the time we have for this 1 hour will not allow us to go through all aspects of the roadmap, but I think we will pick just a number of issues. And I would ask Laura just to start and to give us her perspective by picking, you know, one of the issues, and then we go according to the plan we have in the program. So the second speaker would be then Anita, and then Helen and Xiangdong Li would finish, and we hope I hope we have enough time for a conversation among the speakers. So Laura, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang, and hello, everyone. I picked a theme that the pandemic and the document remind us of, and that's that the online and offline worlds are inseparable. And what does that mean for peace and security? Earlier this year, I published a new book called The Internet in Everything: Freedom and Security in a World with No Off Switch. And I decided to start the book with a question that I will just ask to kick off this panel. And that is that the question of what would the internet be doing if humans suddenly disappeared from Earth? This provides a lot of insights into internet governance debates and conflicts in arenas now. Well, it would be doing a lot. Surveillance cameras in Beijing and Washington, D.C. would continue to stream video. Self-driving trucks would still be hauling material around a mine in Australia. Robots would be moving merchandise around warehouses. Environmental sensors would be gauging pollution levels. A giraffe wandering around a game reserve would trigger a motion detector that opens a gate. Servers would mine Bitcoin. The point is that until electricity stops flowing, cyberspace lives. This at one point would sound like a science fiction story, but it just simply captures how far the digital world has leapt from human-facing display screens into the physical world of material objects. So part of this theme that I'm picking up on and raising is that the internet is no longer just a communication system. It's also a control network in which more things than people are connected, and in which internet governance battles over this infrastructure, as Wolfgang suggested, is absolutely a proxy for political power. Now, this profoundly shapes and shifts the internet governance debates around especially peace and security. Just a quick technical note that we usually refer to this as the Internet of Things. That's a problematic term, but that captures how objects are connected to the internet, including home appliances, connected clothing, and alarm systems, everything. Here in my Northwest Washington neighborhood, our local grocery store during the pandemic, is using robots to deliver groceries around the neighborhood. It, of course, includes the industrial Internet of Things. It includes smart city infrastructure, and probably most relevant to the pandemic, the body is now part of the digital object space. The body is now part of the internet governance object space. When you think about the telehealth, the telemedicine, and the increasing use of things like smart thermometers, connected heart appliances, and insulin pumps. So that's the internet of self. The digital world and the physical world can no longer be viewed as distinct spheres. They're absolutely entangled. This has been happening for a very long time, as long as, the time span certainly that Wolfgang mentioned into the 1990s. But just think about the Mirai botnet, for example, that happened a while back, that used IoT or Internet of Things devices to carry out a denial of service attack on the public sphere. So the security of everything is only as secure and only as sound as these connected objects. This makes cybersecurity the great human rights issue of our time, not only for the security side, but also for the peace side. Now, this background phenomenon of the internet entering the physical world, it really does challenge a lot of my own work on internet governance, and I think the work of our entire community. Because the internet entering the physical world challenges definitions of everything. What is internet governance? What is an internet or technology company? What is an internet user? What is internet freedom? We've often directed our research at, I know in the European Union, you use the term GAFAM, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft, technology companies around the world, not just US technology companies, but it's an interesting acronym. Well, all firms are technology companies in this new cyber physical realm that we're in. They all collect massive amounts of data about people. They all require strong cybersecurity to function. And most companies' core products and services are embedded with cyber capability. They all exist both in the digital world and in the real world. Another complication is that internet users are not people. They're not only people. Many connected objects, like sensors, have no formal relationship to human users. Some people online are actually bots, programs that simulate human activity. Some people who have never even been online, and there still are many people around the world who have never been online, are still directly affected when there's by the things that happen online, such as a data breach that might release their credit card information. So phrases such as being on and off the internet no longer have distinct meaning. Now, tied to the peace concept and the freedom concept that's raised in the document, well, internet freedom, which always has been a contested term and one that's culturally and socially contingent, that really has to change no matter how someone stands on the notion of internet freedom, it has to change from revolving only around content and speech issues into the cyber physical realm of things like algorithmic discrimination that connects to objects around us, freedom to have some private domain, and human safety and security. So the transformation to society is a very, very great one. Of course, I always say in my work, I'm a kind of an engineer at heart. I love technology. The potential for human advancement and economic growth is staggering. Think about telemedicine alone and the promise of that during a global pandemic. But it does create challenges for society that need to be solved. One of them is jobs and digital labor. These objects such as self-driving trucks, connected robots are subsuming entire labor categories. Privacy is transformed. Will any domain of human existence remain private when surveillance is no longer about discovering the contents of an email, but about listening into everything we do in every realm? Security, most obviously transformed, because a cybersecurity breach is no longer about the inability of, let's say, Helen and I sending an email back and forth, but it could be about losing the ability to access medical care or drive a car. And the truth, of course, is that security is nowhere near sufficient. In my book, I go through like 200 things that need to happen to help that, but it's a multi-stakeholder problem. It requires multi-stakeholder solutions. So with all of these challenges, with the cyber physical transformation, I want to just end with the peace part of it a little bit. So anyone with for example, a disabled family member or a loved one with Alzheimer's, or someone with a disability themselves completely understands the upside of the cyber physical world and the internet coming into the physical world. Wearable technologies allow elderly to independently remain in their own homes. Smart medical devices are helping those isolating at home during the pandemic to do telehealth. The Internet of Things, and internet governance then ties directly to the environment. This is the internet and everything, then internet governance connects with everything. For example, with energy sensors that help to conserve natural resources or detect leaks in pipelines. And of course, devices like autonomous vehicles, while they still have a way to go with the innovation, they can help improve safety and productivity in industrial settings. Therefore, raising the concerns and calling for an all-hands-on-deck approach to address some of these open social issues is not dystopian at all. It's precisely because the Internet of Things is so exciting and promising that it's important to get that right, especially in internet governance policy circles. So I just wanted to end with this picture. This is a 5-year-old boy who received his first 3D printed prosthetic arm at a Home Depot, which is in Annapolis, Maryland, not far from my home in Washington, D.C. It was printed on a Dremel 3D printer using blueprints downloaded from an organization that helps volunteers print free artificial limbs for people in need. So this is just a reminder that building trust and security, as the digital cooperation document says, is ultimately about people. Thank you very much for letting me join you, and I look forward to my fellow panelists.
Thank you very much, Laura. And I think this is a good demonstration that we are faced now with a new complexity in the internet governance ecosystem. While technically we know that everything can be connected to everything, but now also the problems related to internet governance are connected. That means each security problem has an economic dimension and has human rights implications. And this makes it so difficult, and the whole battle we had over the recess time between North and South and bridging the digital divides adds to this complexity as a component. And so I'm very happy to have Anita on the panel, which will us give a perspective from India, one of the biggest players in the global South. Anita, you have to go.
Thank you. And your optimism, Laura, is very infectious, and I continue to retain the hope that technology and its governance can be mended in a manner in which we can see it deliver in an equitable way to a point in time where we can imagine people living in a digital society that's much more just and fair. But my take on the Secretary General's roadmap for digital cooperation comes with a wee bit of skepticism, and this is why, and I would like to really place a couple of arguments on this panel. The report acknowledges the inadequacy of existing mechanisms for global digital cooperation and notes that the lack of a common entry point on the global governance of digital architectures has made it especially hard for developing countries, small and medium enterprises, marginal groups, and other stakeholders with limited budgets and expertise to make their voices heard. These are valid points in the diagnosis, pointing to the power imbalance in the digital context, one that's deeply disconcerting given that the fault lines of inequality of our future society are predicated on the digital paradigm, as has already been pointed out by both of you. I'd like to focus my attention on these elements and divide my observations in two broad areas. The process that has been suggested in the report in order to address the current impasse, and secondly, the idea of digital public goods explicated in the report is critical to the way forward. So firstly, on process. The solution offered by the report is to refurbish the Internet Governance Forum and make it, and I quote, more relevant and responsive to current digital issues, close quote, through a series of actions. And one of this is to create a multi-stakeholder high-level body to relay proposed policy approaches and recommendations from the IGF to appropriate normative and decision-making forums. Of course, the revamping of the IGF is indeed very welcome. However, Internet governance is also very unique in that even as the digital intervenes in and complicates the normative underpinnings of many socioeconomic issues, from trade to health, education, entertainment, human rights, and so much more, it also deserves separate treatment. And the truth is that the normative aspects of the digital do not really have a home. So we have a circular problem here. How can an under-optimal IGF be remedied if the task of relaying core digital issues to an appropriate home or apex forum cannot be accomplished? Also, with the Snowden revelations in particular and the centralization of digital power in the hands of a few Silicon Valley and Chinese companies, things have gotten much more complicated. Some governments in the global south and civil society networks have referred to how the de facto control of critical internet architecture in the hands of the US thus present a problem of democratic deficit in internet governance. This problem has only become more pronounced with new battle fronts opening up, and these concern the crucial issues of cross-border data flows and the role of AI in all walks of life. The fact of the matter is that development, in the sense of North-South politics, is deeply tied to data and digital intelligence as an economic resource. And the status quo on this is deeply unjust, with a few corporations squatting on top of the data resources and intelligence capabilities they have garnered. So the Secretary General's report completely ignores the elephant in the room, the global political economy of the digital paradigm that reinforces an unequal world order. Considering that the most critical questions of digital governance today, the regulation of cross-border data flows, rights of governments to access source code and algorithms of transnational technology companies, and even historically important internet governance questions such as intermediary liability in cybercrime are being discussed in closed-door digital trade policy spaces, the report could have highlighted the crippling consequences for the less powerful of not having an appropriate internet governance forum globally. Forum shopping of digital governance issues by the powerful and making trade negotiations the site of contestation does not bode well at all for global digital cooperation. This brings me to the second point I want to make. Para 22 of the Secretary General's report calls for the utilization of big data and artificial intelligence to create digital public goods in the form of actionable, real-time, and predictive insights for addressing development challenges. It recommends the setting up of multi-stakeholder alliances for the creation of open data infrastructure and open artificial intelligence models. But what do we know from the first generation initiatives in big data for public good? In practice, these have ended up often giving big corporations proprietary control over big data sets and access to new market segments based on open AI developed through free labor on top of these data sets. I'd like to talk about the Digital Impact Alliance, one of these multi-stakeholder exemplars, which is a collaborative initiative of the United Nations Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the government of Sweden, and USAID. This is ostensibly for promoting development capacity in low-resource countries to support national digital transformation. The modus operandi is to work with mobile network associations, such as the GSMA, and of course, unabashedly, the aim of these initiatives is to unlock markets. In a context where the lion's share of patents in data and AI technologies are with US and Chinese companies, such a market-based approach to technology transfer is unlikely to actually build digital public goods. It's not going to yield dividends for development of domestic technological capabilities in LDCs. The net result is that digital and data technologies is going to really, in terms of the traditional development domains, sidestep the questions of public finance with misplaced optimism around private financing models. I'd like to conclude by also calling attention to certain areas where a multilateral consensus is urgently needed, and in my opinion, ought to have been flagged in the report, but this is missing. The first is digital rights over and above privacy concerning the digital economy, which includes rights of workers, rights of small producers, etc. The second is a global governance institutional regime for cross-border global data flows that acknowledges the global character of the internet and its role in promoting peace and sustainability, while also respecting the jurisdictional sovereignty of peoples in developing countries. The data of people and communities and indigenous populations is not for extractivism. The third is the urgency of closing out the ongoing negotiations on the Treaty on Transnational Corporations, the binding treaty, and big tech regulation is a very, very important part of the binding treaty. And the fourth is the reform of the international taxation system to account for the increasing virtualization of economic activities. I'd like to stop by saying that there's very little in the report that grapples with these core issues of the real politic of sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anita, for your critical approach and the analysis when you concluded that the status quo is unjust, and you see a lot of holes in the report of the UN Secretary General, which moves in a certain direction but does not cover all issues which, in your eyes, should have been covered. I hope we have some time left for a discussion also about the relationship between multilateralism and multi-stakeholderism and the role of the United Nations and a distributed negotiation system where the United Nations is not the world governor of the internet, but a platform for a multi-stakeholder dialogue, which is a different role. I think these are the right questions you have to ask. And that's in the tradition of the IMCR, which was always a critical watchdog and not just, a neutral observer of the processes. And with this, I will move to Helen. And so the floor is yours, Helen.
Okay, thank you. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So I'm going to talk about trust. So trust is not mentioned very often in the new UN document, yet, as sociologist of trust Stomka argues, it's crucial for dealing with uncertain, uncontrollable or risky situations like digitally mediated life. Even Part D of the document, which is called Trust, Security and Stability, doesn't actually say a lot about trust. Here, trust is conflated with security and also in recommendations relating to this part of the document. So in this conflation of trust and security, there's an assumption that a secure internet will be trusted. This is in some ways a reasonable assumption, Based on a long literature review, which I recently undertook, this is it, I can report that research finds that where people don't trust public sector organisations with their online digital data, this is indeed because of concern that these organisations are not secure. And then research that I've undertaken into public attitudes to data collection and management finds that people might trust an organisation and its intentions to keep data secure, but they don't trust that it will be able to do so because they see the broader internet ecosystem as insecure. But this assumption about a relationship between trust and security alone is too simple. Research also finds that in the case of the private sector, people don't trust organisations with their online data because they think these private companies might sell or share their data without consent. And this isn't about security. Rather, it's about organisations handling data and going about their business in just and responsible ways. Where there's distrust in digital systems, this is often for good reason, either because companies are known to function in ways that don't inspire trust, as in the famous Facebook Cambridge Analytica scandal, or they're known to discriminate against socially disadvantaged population, as in reports of racism embedded in the algorithmic criminal justice system in the US, reported in ProPublica, and accompanied by this quite famous image. So in such instances, as philosopher Annette Beyer puts it, trust busting, that is not trusting, can be a morally proper goal. People's positions within unequal social structures also inform whether they trust and what they deem to be trustworthy. It's been found that wealthy and well-educated groups have higher levels of trust than others, both historically and more recently, because those whose lives are more insecure trust less, because betrayed trust is more consequential. And systems are often embedded with the worldviews of their usually privileged creators, as seen in racism in criminal justice systems, and also as widely established by science and technology studies. This is another reason that people may distrust them. Indigenous studies scholar Bronwyn Carlson argues that systems need to earn the trust of socially disadvantaged populations for this reason. Trust in the system, she says, demands that we begin to infiltrate that system in order to force it to incorporate the views and experiences of those discriminated against as a result of social inequalities. In other words, systems which don't acknowledge inequalities are unlikely to be deemed trustworthy by people who live with them. So thinking about whether systems are deserving of trust shifts attention away from those doing the trusting to the trustworthiness of systems themselves. Trustworthiness has been the focus of literature on public understanding of science, where it's been argued that efforts to increase public understanding as a way of addressing distrust are flawed, in part because this assumption that greater understanding leads to greater trust remains unproven. So to ensure trust, the focus should not be on what the public understands, but rather on ensuring that systems are trustworthy. The belief that understanding will result in greater trust has been disproven by qualitative research, including my own and that of Sarah Pink and others, who showed that trust has emotional, affective dimensions which aren't necessarily addressed by something like, say, clear information. All of this is to say that trust is complex. For one thing, trust and distrust are not clearly distinct from each other. Multiple context-dependent layers of trust and distrust interact in people's engagements with the internet and internet ecosystems. And we see a coming together of whether people trust in institutions generally, whether they trust in institutions to do specific things, whether they trust the broader internet ecosystem, and even if they trust themselves to manage their online lives carefully and thoughtfully. So as a result of these complexities, trust, skepticism and distrust coexist with each other, It's very difficult for a roadmap to take all of this stuff on board, but at the same time, it needs to take all of this stuff on board to kind of really understand how trust functions, and to understand that trust is a moral and a political matter. It relates to justice, to human rights, and to inclusion, which are topics discussed in the document that we're talking about today. But trust won't be achieved by technical security and stability alone, which is kind of a bit implied by the way that it's formulated in the document. Some parts of the document acknowledge that. So, for example, in Part A, in the section on digital public goods, it says that central to the implementation of digital public goods are robust human rights and governance frameworks, which enhance trust and in technology and data use. In Part C, on the section on digital identity, it argues that digital identity, if it's to be trusted, has to be built on a foundation of user agency and choice, informed consent, recognition of multiple forms of identity, space for anonymity and respect for privacy. And in recommendations in relation to Part D, it's claimed that digital technologies must be deployed in a safe and trustworthy manner that narrows the digital divide. So trust is essential to internet governance, but it won't happen if it's assumed to be achieved through technical security and technical stability. So in case it's not clear, I would say that I am talking about the same things that Anita talked about, which is, while we have the global political economy that we have around the internet, it won't be deemed trustworthy, it won't be trusted, and it will be complicated to govern. And I would say that I'm also picking up on some of the themes that Laura talked about in relation to how governance relates to justice, fairness, and rights. Trust also relates to justice, fairness, and rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. And, while you did put the trust in the context of the first chapters of the roadmap, trust is also seen by the roadmap in relationship to security. And in the international security negotiations, they are using also the term confidence, and confidence building measures are a key element of cybersecurity. And this adds just another dimension to this very complexity. And I think it's up to the academic community to massage this complexity into a way so that people can better understand the various dimensions, to simplify the complexity by keeping, the nature of this very complex issues to treat them in a realistic way. So that means a big challenge is ahead of us, and while we have seen already in some of the conversations that this is not just a relationship between individuals and technology. This is also a battle among states. And GAFA was already mentioned, but we have also big Chinese corporations. They are called now BAT, which stands for Baidu, Alibaba, for Tencent, and for Huawei, or Huawei and Tencent. But China was not a big player 25 years ago in the internet governance debate, but now it's a big player. And so I'm very happy that Xiang Dong is with us. Xiang Dong, what is your reflection about the roadmap and the future of internet governance?
Thank you, Professor Wolfgang. Before my remarks, I just want to let you know, in next month, we will have the first Chinese IGF. Actually, we wait for that for more than 20 years. So we will have the China IGF and also the MAC for IGF, and also the working group on that. So I use my background as a bridge. Why I want to use this? Because I want to mention two issues. So I just want to use this bridge because the two issues, one is the digital divide. So I think that now the digital divide is much larger than before. And I think it's much worse, and maybe in the future. So we need to do something. We need to bridge the digital divide. And the second thing we want to bridge is we have a lot of discussion about if the internet will be fragmented. So I think that it might be very big possibility the internet will be fragmented. So how to avoid that, how to bridge the future, maybe possible fragmented internet is another thing we want to discuss. So if we just look at the UN roadmap document, I think the second issue, the first issue for the data divide was mentioned a lot, but the second issue is not mentioned a lot. So I think it's a big issue. So from this this COVID-19 issues, so in China, so we can give some data for you to share with you. So now we have 900 million internet users in China. That means the internet penetration rate is about 65%. And also, we have a lot of smartphone users, but the penetration rate for smartphone is less than 70%. That means we have more than 500 million people is not internet users, and more than 400 million people is not smartphone users. But this time, Chinese government control the flow of the people around the country. So we just used some barcode. If you can show your barcode, barcode is green, that means you are healthy. Okay, you can take the high-speed train, take the flight. Otherwise, you cannot take that. So that means if the people they don't have the smartphone, so that means you cannot go to me from my hometown in Shandong province to come to Beijing. So that is very interesting. Last week, there is a news was very spreaded. So there is old people. I think he's not very old, maybe around 60s, because he don't know how to use the smartphone. So he just walk 1,000 kilometers, to another city. So I think it's terrible. I think it's fantastic. We use the big data, AI, and the information technologies to control COVID-19. But consider that we have 100 million people cannot use smartphone. So that's is a big divide. Even the people and the young children, if they are in the rural area, there is a lack of the opportunity to study online. It's a big issue because all of the schools in China in the past 2 months was shut down. Every children will stay home. Even my 2 daughters now is in another room. They stay there. They cannot go to the primary school and the kindergarten. So it's a big issue. Because in China we have Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, but we have another more than 100 cities. The internet penetration rate less than 50%. And now the internet penetration rate in the world is about 53%. But in China, a lot of cities is less than that. Another thing is the internet fragmentation. So we have discussed this issue for many, many years. So, but now because every government thinks that the internet is very important. So especially for the infrastructure, so they worry a lot about security of the infrastructure. So they try to do something for this. So that in this year there's a lot of news, even in China and Russia, and I don't know if it happened in other countries. So I know that Russia announced they have to do some tests. They just shut down the internet and to check if the internet in Russia can be work if we close that. So I don't know what's the detailed information. I don't know that, but I think it's a very terrible news in the world. And also even in my country, there's a lot of different kind of thinking about how to build a new internet. Of course, there's a big news that Huawei raised a proposal in ITU to discuss a new IP. I think even it's not new, it's very fresh news, but because they raised this proposal in ITU, it's not in ITF. So there's a lot of discussion if the Huawei want to build a new internet. So I think there's a lot of discussion. And I heard this different kind of voice, how to build another internet, how to make sure that their internet can be safe. So another thing is it's not to build a new internet is in the global layer, but in the city layer, even in the country layer, so many data entities think and the institution think the data is very important. So you don't want to share the data with others. So that's another kind of fragmented internet because nobody wants to share the data. That's a very, very terrible situation. Even the UN document mentioned how to provide more public product. But I think it's not enough. They should mention that because the data is much more important than before, because everybody wants to earn money from the data, even they don't know how to earn money, but they just want to protect the data. So I think now the issue is the biggest issue. I think is data protection many years ago, but now I think data sharing is another very important issue now. I think compared data privacy and data protection, I think data sharing may be much more important than that. So that's my thing. The two issue is very, very important. And we need to mention this in the document and mention a lot, and to discover what kind of what kind of possible solution to do that. Even that, I think it's in the document they mention what kind of platform they want to build, what kind of solution they want to find. But I think it's not enough, especially for the data divide. They mentioned in 2030, everybody can access the internet. I think it's impossible. Even after 10 years, I do believe in China, not everybody in China can access the internet. Not everybody in the world, because we have another 3 billion people cannot access the internet in the world. If we only use 10 years to improve the internet penetration rate from 50% to 80 or 90%, I think it's impossible. Yeah, so there's a lot of barriers, the technology issues, the investment issues, a lot of issues. So I think it's, for UN, it's a very good platform, but they should find a very reasonable solution to achieve the goals. So I think it's very important. It's just my personal view. Yeah, I just want to share my feeling and my finding with you, colleagues.
Thank you, Xiandong. And I think this is a very good example that with the next generation of people and the next generation of devices, we see now the next generation of problems. And probably the problems we have discussed 25 years ago, will not be the problems we have to discuss in the next 10 years. On the other hand, the basic issues like, war and peace, or let's say digital or the welfare of people and the respect of human rights remain untouched, but they are discussed now in a new environment. And while we have only 8 minutes left for a discussion, so I would ask the final question to the 4 panelists, what would be the right mechanism to deal with this? Anita has raised this issue and said, the proposals made in the roadmap are too vague and not clear enough with the IGF Plus proposal and all the weaknesses which are around the IGF. On the other hand, the IGF is the only multi-stakeholder platform which is global, which has the legitimacy of respected by all member states of the United Nations and by all stakeholders. So we had a battle between multilateralism and multi-stakeholderism for many years, which was a senseless battle in my eyes from the very early beginning, because the state will not disappear, but the multilateral system is today embedded in a multi-stakeholder environment. So, and now I think this is a great offer that the United Nations offers itself as a platform for a multi-stakeholder dialogue. So, because there was a lot of mistrust 20 years ago that the United Nations itself will become the world governor of the internet. I think this is over. We should not continue to fight this stupid battle. But looking forward, how this multi-stakeholder dialogue, within intergovernmental organizations can be organized with the help of a multi-stakeholder IGF and the new technology envoy, which will be nominated by the Secretary General of the United Nations, and which will become probably something like the Internet Governance Admiral, who will steer the Internet fleet through the oceans in stormy waters. So a very quick reply from all of us, and then unfortunately we have to close the session. So I would start again with Laura and then end with Xiandong. Laura, any short comment?
Thank you very much. The first thing I would say is that, one thing that we all have in common, and we're all in different time zones today, is that we're being affected by a worldwide pandemic. And the same reason that we can come together today is the same reason that some people continue their education, people are able to work from home. And again, not everyone can work from home, and there's a digital divide to be solved. But the solution to all of these problems cannot be that we just have to unplug. We have to solve the problems. We have to acknowledge and, in a way, stop bashing the internet. Because imagine what this pandemic would be like without it. The second point I would make is that the dialogues, the paper, the reports, the Internet Governance Forum, it's just a dialogue. It's just a conversation. And that Internet governance is the thing that happens outside of these dialogues as well, in the actions of standard-setting organizations, in the actions of ICANN, in bilateral negotiations, in the private policy-making role of individual corporations. So I just want to acknowledge what all of us know, but just want to capture it for this recording, that this is a very large ecosystem, but that the reason that it has worked and that we have the internet that brings so many benefits to everyone, even with all of the problems, is precisely because of the multi-stakeholder model. And I find it very ironic that even now there's a continuing push for multilateral solutions and for a governance body to oversee this. Because if you just look at, we represent different countries. If you just look at the countries that we represent, the governments do not have a good track record. I'm sorry, it's just the truth. Look at the way that the Indian government is constantly shutting down the internet. Look at the systems of censorship in China. Look at the systems of surveillance in the UK and the United States. So I think that the reason that the multi-stakeholder model works is because no one actor is perfect, and the balance of powers among them helps move us along. Thank you.
I think the balance of powers and the distribution of power is a key element, and we as an academic organization should make this very clear in the public debate, because I think public opinion can not be ignored by the governors, where still the real power is. And sharing is one of the basic principles. It was mentioned by several people, and in the definition of internet governance, you have this keyword of sharing. But sharing power is a complicated challenge for people who believe in power. So Anita, you have raised this issue of the architecture and the mechanisms, and how to move forward to find the right balance between multilateral and multi-stakeholder activities. Your final comment, please.
We're not decision makers, so our minds don't necessarily think in terms of, how to fix democracy. But as people who are deeply implicated in the decisions that our governments and decisions that people who represent us make, I think we have to engage with these questions, not just at an academic level, but really at a practical level. So the first thing I think is that if multilateralism has, all those qualifiers and its DNA is inherently authoritarian, we should reject it. And of course, I think there's no doubt that it's a shame the way in which our governments conduct the business of internet-based democracy, when you could actually enhance democracy through the internet. But I also think that in the vacuum created by the multi-stakeholder model, what we see is that powers that be in the political economy of trade, in the political economy of intellectual property, in the political economy of the entertainment industry, you actually see a cultural colonization, you see an economic colonization. So the multi-stakeholder model, and I completely agree with Laura that internet governance actually happens outside of these dialogic forums, you know. So it is really a devil in deep sea predicament, and you know, so how do you get out of it? The truth of the matter is nobody, you know, needs really largesse. You know, you don't really want somebody to say, in the name of digital cooperation, we are setting up this school which will have state-of-the-art technology to educate the rural populations of Indonesia. You know, nobody really wants that. People, as was pointed out in Helen's presentation, we do need trust, we need agency, choice, we need informed consent, autonomy, privacy. But much of this debate around autonomy and trust is placed within a kind of a contract between companies and the individual. And I think we need to destabilize that so that the social contract around the internet is not individualized. It really needs, I think, a data and AI constitutionalism. And I think there are two ways to work at it. One is through multilateral multi-stakeholder dialogue like the UN CSTD model, where there are experts, there are AI and ethics people, there are sociologists, there are humanities scholars, and there are in rotation members of government who are deliberating and conveying to this envoy who is sought to be appointed by the UN what may be an imagination of democracy at the level of global cooperation. Simultaneously, we really need to hold our own governments to account for a certain new digital constitutionalism, a new social contract in the 21st century, especially post the pandemic, cannot be accomplished without thinking through digital democracy. And I think that's a task for all of us in our own countries. We have to go to the streets and we have to do it. And claiming both these spaces at the same time, I think, is very important.
Thank you, Anita. And probably we can learn also something from history. When you mentioned the social contract, I remember discussion in the early days of the Industrial Revolution when Jean-Jacques Rousseau mentioned this and said, okay, we have to fix the new problems which came with the Industrial Revolution. And if you look now into the developments of today, these are the consequences of the information revolution, which produces good and bad things. And we have to find a way to balance this, to maximize the opportunities, to minimize the risks, and to find an arrangement between the various players based on democracy and the rule of law. I think theoretically this is clear. That's the difficulty is to translate this into practical policy. And for this you need trust. And Helen, so your final comment on this debate.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Laura and Anita said. The problem isn't the internet. The problem is unequal social structures, including colonialism. And if we wanted to do internet governance better, one way we could do it is to get rid of the existing system and start a new one. That's not very realistic. So then what we can do is, you know, lobby, advocate, be activists, go out on the street. And I agree that, you know, the focus on trust individualizes the social contract. And that's why if we shift away and think about trustworthiness, we would think about how is capitalism behaving, and how are states governing how capitalism behaves. So it shifts the attention away from people. I would also say, though, one of the solutions is don't forget to listen to people. I've, you know, spent 20 years building an academic career where I end up in that very simple place. Don't forget to listen to people, but not as individuals, people as collectives, as communities, as populations. That is much more easily said than done. I've done loads of research about public opinion, about, you know, data practices and data gathering and so on, and experimented with methods like citizen juries, which are very much about feeding public views into policy making. You know, it isn't straightforward. We come back to where I started. The decision makers have to want to listen. And as Laura said, the countries that we represent are not governed by people that do want to listen.
Thank you, Helen. And I think we had a good gender balance in this panel. So it's justified to give the last word to a man. So Xian Dong, yeah, so the last word is yours.
Okay, as a former member of IGF, if you ask me, what's my opinion, if the IGF is the right platform for the future action platform, my answer is possibly not. I do believe we do need a platform for talk and talk. I do believe in the future 10 years or 20 years, we need such kind of platform for talk. But we really need a platform for action. So I don't think that IGF in the past more than 10 years would have happened in the IGF to prove the IGF is a good platform for take actions. If we recall memory for the IGF in Bali, so because the Indonesian government, it's very possible that at that year we cannot have IGF because lack of money. So I mean, for UN, if we want to choose some kind of platform such as IGF Plus, so they really need to make the IGF to be more sustainable, especially how to run the IGF. So I love the multi-stakeholder model, but if we look at the IETF, ISOC, or ICANN, or AP, or IRR, every organization have the financial support. So I really believe we need maybe build a new platform. It's much easier to reunion some kind of current platform.
Thank you very much. And I remember, by the way, Kofi Annan, when I was a member in the UN Working Group on Internet Governance, he gave in the opening meeting a speech where he said, the Internet is a great innovation in technology, but so far we didn't see any innovation in policy. And it's still, unfortunately, the reality that our policymakers try to solve problems of the 21st century with the instruments of the 20th century. So we have no big innovations in policy making. And I think this is probably the main challenge for the next 10 years, to learn from the, experiences we have made, from the good and bad things. So the IGF Plus, or the IGF was a good start, but as Xiang Dong say, it's not sufficient. So it has a number of problems which was raised by Anita. So Helen linked the individual component to the intergovernmental component, and Laura said, everything is connected with everything. There are no two worlds anymore. So we need something new, and this is the challenge we are facing. And hopefully, this debate here, which was in my eyes very exciting and gave different perspectives, could become the starting point for an exciting academic journey into the next 10 years, where probably in 10 years we will have something which we do not know now. So thank you very much for everybody, and I hope that the next IMCR conference will take place in a real face-to-face meeting, either in China or in Finland or in another place of the world. Thank you very much for your participation, and to the audience, enjoy listening to this debate. Thank you. Bye-bye.